1. I have to preface this by saying that I really don't drink too much, especially prior to today. I had been very drunk maybe 2 times before, once when I was 17, by mixing every alcohol we had in the house and drinking it. That wasn't too bad. And another by drinking way too much Fireball and spending a couple hours vomiting fire. That was much worse. I've also never really been to parties, or bought alcohol from a bar or restaurant, because I'm a bit of an antisocial nerd, leading me to not really know what many real drinks are. This week, I had to go to New Orleans for a work trip, and today I was working a reasonably long day, mind you. I had been working a few 16-hour days up to this point. My 2 co-workers that had come on this trip as well as myself were very happy at the work we had accomplished today, and decided we should celebrate a job well done, as the next morning we would be flying home. We decided to go with one of our customers to a nice bar way down at the end of Bourbon Street. So we walked down Bourbon Street, which I must admit is pretty dirty and nasty. I'm not one for strip clubs, and having multiple people try to corral me into theirs just wasn't my style. I also don't drink much, as I said before, so there wasn't much for me here. Anyways, we get to the bar and there's a wait. Our customer orders 4 monsoons for the 4 of us, and asks me to help him carry them to my co-workers. I see the woman make the drink, a shot or so of 2 kinds of alcohol, followed by a large quantity of this purple juice-like stuff that came out of a big jug. Hey, these drinks aren't that strong, I thought to myself. Only a couple shots of alcohol in each. FU number 1 right there. We are standing outside the restaurant waiting for our table to be ready, and I start sipping my drink. Yum, it was super tasty. I drank it quite quickly, and was just about finished when we sat down at the table. I ordered a burger and a baked potato and thought, hey, I should have another one of these tasty drinks. So I ordered another, FU number 2. Mind you, at this point, I had drank the first one so quickly that I had not begun to feel any of its effects yet. Let's just say I don't remember even getting the second one delivered to the table. So from this point on, the story is a mixture of what I can remember myself and what my customer and co-workers told me. I do remember getting the burger and potato, and rapidly scarfing both down. They were delicious. Apparently I also chugged my second monsoon in under a minute. FU number 3. At this point I remember feeling suddenly very ill, and didn't know what to do. So I did what any normal person would do, put my hands over my mouth. FU number 4. I then proceeded to vomit 2 to 3 times all over my favorite sweater, jeans and shoes. My co-workers kept telling me to throw up into my cup, but I didn't want to listen. Eventually I did decide to throw up one final time into my cup, and filled it to the brim with burgery monsoony goodness. I don't remember this part, but apparently my comrades quickly paid for the meal, including my customer paying for my food, and put an extra $5 to take care of the mess I'd made. I still feel terrible about that. And we quickly left the restaurant before anyone could notice. I only remember bits and pieces of the walk back from the restaurant, all the way down Bourbon Street, and back to the hotel. I remember that I would only keep walking if I was arm in arm with one of my co-workers, and if people walked between us and we had to separate, I would stand still until we could reunite. What a bro, he's the real MVP here. I also remember repeating, I'm so annoyed that one half of my brain is working fine, and the other half is going crazy. Apparently, during this walk, the customer also managed to get me to give him $20 to cover my meal. I'm glad he did, as I didn't want him to pay for my food. That's about all I remember from the 20-minute or so walk back, but my co-workers deposited me back at the hotel, where I threw up a few more times. This time in the toilet at least, and got a bit of sleep. My co-workers decided to go back out to another club, and apparently had several more drinks, and one of them started a club-wide conga line. I'm sad that I missed that. The next morning I wake up at 4ish AM, as that's when we had to be up for our flight. I spent 15 minutes or so washing my sweater, jeans and shoes in the sink to try and remove the offending puke. It didn't work too well, and washing my shoes in the washing machine when I got home kinda ruined them, so I had to get a new pair. One of my co-workers was on the same flight as me, so I texted him to make sure he was up. I was still definitely drunk, but felt 100% better in regards to feeling sick. My co-worker doesn't respond, so I call his hotel room. He picks up the phone and hangs it up, assuming it was a wake-up call, I guess. I call again, but there's no answer. I decide then to walk over to his hotel room and bang on the door. He answers it in a stupor with no shirt on, and tells me he'll be downstairs in 15 minutes. I accept this, and go down to the lobby. 45 minutes or so later, he comes down and tells me that when he said he'd be down in 15 minutes, he really just set an alarm for 15 minutes and went to sleep. He then woke up and realized he had thrown up in the sink and shower, so he spent time cleaning those and freshening up, and then finally came downstairs. We got in the car and I could tell that he was still not fit to drive, but I also knew that I wasn't 100% there, and didn't want to risk getting in trouble as the rental car was in his name anyways. I spent the whole trip watching the lines on the road like a hawk, and being ready to grab the wheel if we started to veer. Thankfully he only left the lines once, which he rectified quickly, and there were barely any other cars on the road due to it being 5 AM. We made it safely to the airport, and I was feeling a lot better, definitely hungover, but not nearly as ill feeling as my co-worker. The flight was uneventful for me, but apparently my co-worker spent a good portion of it throwing up in the bathroom, as he went in there because he felt sick, and at that moment there was turbulence, so everyone was called back to their seats. He was already in the bathroom, so he just hung out there for 45 minutes or so. When I got home, my wife was upset, because I had neglected to pick up beignets for her, as I had promised to. But she forgave me quickly and was super kind and took care of me, as all I wanted to do when I got home was slowly eat crackers and take a nap. Thankfully there were no real work repercussions for this fiasco, and the worst the customer did was jokingly put his hands over his mouth when I saw him the next day. Mocking FU number 4. I'm still super embarrassed though, and never want to go to Bourbon Street again. 2. So here I am, sitting in the train writing this. It actually happened a few hours ago before I jumped on the train. My hands are still shaking as I am typing. It was a very unpleasant experience, really stressful. That could not have happened if I had been smarter. But I guess that's how most TIFU go, right? Anyways, for some background to understand the story, this happened in a big train station in Brussels, Belgium. Brussels has been in a constant terrorist alert since the events of the 22nd March 2016. People of Brussels live with fear of another terrorist attack ever since, and since there are military patrolling in every public place. Like this train station, for example. I had to take a train to go to my father's place for 2 weeks. Therefore I had a big backpack, and a huge and heavy bag to carry, which contained valuables like my laptop. Before entering the station, I noticed a strange dude following me. He seemed quite drunk and bizarre, but nothing too unusual for this city. As I enter the station, he starts insulting me and shouting while following me. I pay no attention and I continue to walk. Then I arrive in the main hall of the station. There are people everywhere, and 3 military standing not far from me. At this moment, I have had enough of that dude shouting at me, and I decide to face him and make him go away. To empty my arms from that heavy bag, so that I can defend myself if need be, I decide to drop it at the military's feet, so that they can keep an eye on it, and move quickly towards the drunk guy. Big mistake. I'm sure you can already tell what happened next. At that moment I hear a loud shout behind me. "You there! Stop right there! Don't move!" I stop, and I slowly turn around. Around me everything seems quieter, and a few meters from me are 3 military pointing their weapons at me. I'm petrified. I can't move nor breathe. They swiftly move away from the bag I left behind, and shout at everyone to stand back and evacuate the hall, while still pointing their guns at me. One guy shouts in his radio. I think it was to get backup, because in no time, there are more than 10 policemen standing around me. I can hear panic and the people quickly running away from the main hall. It was surreal, like in a nightmare. Then I try to explain the situation. I'm so stressed that I don't even understand what I'm saying. The police search me, completely. After a few minutes that felt like hours to me, they decide to believe me and open my bag on their own without calling a bomb squad. Of course, there was nothing. Running shoes, trousers, my laptop, etc. After more than an hour of talking with the police, they decide to let me go without any penalty. I re-enter the hall and find it's full of people as if nothing happened. Now I hate that bag, and myself for being such an idiot. 3. This happened several years ago when I was going to graduate school in New York City. If you've never had the pleasure of attending a graduate school, then let me say that it is like college on steroids in terms of alcohol consumption. I have never drank as much as when I attended graduate school. Maybe to deaden the pain of a bad career choice, but I digress. Now, while working towards your degree, students are also expected to put in full time in a research lab of our choosing. I had a great lab experience, with an awesome boss and some great lab mates. Everyone was so awesome we would not only occasionally drink in lab, don't judge, but we would also go out and pretty much drink together every night. This is where all my graduate stipend money went, I guess. There was this one girl in our lab, we'll call her Carol, whom I really got along with. Great girl. We had pretty much the same sense of humor and many of the same interests. On this particular night, Carol and I and the other members of the lab were drinking late into the evening because we knew our boss would be out of the office the following day. Carol and I also had a great love for tennis, and we decided, since the boss was out, that we were going to sneak out of lab and play a couple of sets the next day. Now, if you love tennis and you live in New York City, then you know all about the courts in Central Park, located near 96th Street and the Upper East Side. These courts are iconic. You get a nice spread of pros and newcomers who play here. The courts are set up such that you walk through a fence to enter the first row of courts, and then walk through a second fence to enter the back row of courts. Usually the best players, who the staff members were familiar with, were given the front courts, and casual players were relegated to the back courts. The two center courts, right in front of the entrance, were usually reserved for the best of the best. Many people would come just to watch play in those two courts. The tennis center has very strict rules about your shoes, your clothes, being on time, and observing all their regulations. In fact, there is one staff member, we call him the enforcer, who stands at the entrance to the courts making sure everyone follows the rules. Back in the day, if you wanted to reserve a court, you had to get up early and get your ass over to the courts when they opened, 6:30 a.m., to sign up for a spot. Sweet Carol did this and informed me that day that she had reserved a court for noon on this particularly hot and humid summer day. She told me this when I rolled into lab still hungover from our drinks the night before. I guess I drank more than I intended, but I still felt fine to play. The hour rolls around and we head over to the courts. Now I should mention that I love tennis and have been playing since high school. I consider myself pretty good. Carol was also a better than average player. On this particular day, since I was still feeling a bit drunk and hungover, and it was a hot summer day at noon, we decided we wouldn't push ourselves too hard. So we get there, expecting to play our match on the outer courts, as that's what Carol had signed up for. But when we reach the gates, the enforcer, whom I've been shamelessly flirting with all season to get better court placement, let us know that one of the center courts has opened up, and if we'd like to play there. Before my slow brain can even process this, Carol enthusiastically says yes! Fuck! Now I know that our fun little match is out the window. Center court is the real deal, and they expect you to put on a show. So the game begins. I'm really putting in 110%, running down every shot, returning everything that comes on my side, even trying to put some speed on my serves. I'm putting in such effort, and it's so hot, that I'm starting to really sweat. At this point, I'm starting to smell the gin from last night in my sweat. I'm also starting to get really winded, and I notice black spots in my vision. You can probably guess what comes next. Before I can even let Carol know I don't feel well, I pass out. I come to with Carol by my side. I look up and the enforcer is not happy. He tells us to get off center court. I'm so embarrassed, I just want to get the hell out of there. I'm just glad I didn't get us banned from the courts for the season. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the day in bed, after taking a nice cold shower. 4. So tonight at work, I finished drinking a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi that I keep stashed in my drawer. I decided to try to make it take up less space in the trash, since I'm a lazy piece of shit and don't like taking it out more often than I have to, by squeezing all the air out before throwing it away. This did not reduce the size as much as I had hoped. So I had another brilliant idea. I would melt it with a blowtorch. I suppose I should throw in a little information about where I work at this point in the story. I work in a quality lab at a plastics manufacturing plant. My job typically involves burning, melting, x-raying, etc. All kinds of plastic samples of the material we are currently making. I use said blowtorch pretty much daily to burn residue off some of the test equipment. Anyway, I grab the metal bucket that we use to contain hot waste until it's cool enough to throw away, so it doesn't start a fire in the main waste barrel. This is supposed to be emptied every shift, but it usually only gets dumped when it's full. So unsurprisingly, it was not empty. I went ahead and used it anyway and placed it under the vent hood so any smoke and fumes would get sucked out of the room. Upon taking the torch to the bottle, it satisfyingly melted and shriveled just as I'd hoped. When it got too small to hold comfortably, without burning my fingers, I dropped it into the bucket and continued torching it. This lit the other contents of the bucket. No big deal. I'd burned things in this bucket before because, well, I have access to a blowtorch, and burning things is fun. Whatever was in the bucket this time, however, was considerably more flammable than I realized, and before long, the fire was nearing the point of getting out of control. The flames were at least twice as high as the size of the bucket, and nearly reaching the top of the vent hood. There was also an absurd amount of smoke to the point where it was more than the ventilation fans could suck out of the room, and was filling with smoke. I knew if I didn't get it under control soon, the sprinklers were going to kick on, so I was starting to panic. We have, of course, received fire extinguisher training, and have one in the lab. But they are sealed, and using one meant I would have to report it as an incident to management. And I did not want to explain why I was burning a Pepsi bottle in a bucket. So I did something I knew was stupid and tried putting the fire out with water. If you've never been trained on putting out fires, chemical fires cannot be extinguished with water. This made it worse, and at this point I had to use the extinguisher. So after putting out the fire, I called my supervisor because I was required to. He was required to report it to the site fire department, who were required to sound the plant fire alarm and come check things out for themselves. During this time, the entire plant is required to shut down and go into lockdown in shelters. Luckily, by the time the fire crew got there, there was absolutely nothing recognizable left of the bottle. I was able to play it off like the fire had started during normal work, and while I'm sure the incident isn't going to be dropped without an investigation, and me sitting through multiple meetings, retelling my story and possibly being retrained, I don't think I'm going to face any sort of disciplinary action. The bucket was the only thing damaged. The heat of the fire had been so intense that it had actually charred and burned holes through parts of the metal bucket. 5. So I attended this fairly new music festival last weekend with my girlfriend and a few friends. It turned out a crowd about 15,000 strong. It's only been going for a few years, and it seems they haven't quite got it running down to a science yet. We had a nice campsite set up, and we were just hanging out when a guy popped his head in between two of our tapestries, and, like he was revving a motorcycle, said, Shroom, shroom, shroom! Well, he seemed like he was having a good time, so I bought an eighth off him and decided to just eat them all then and there. After about an hour, we walked out of the woods and decided to check out some music. It seemed like there was a lot of weird stuff going on. It was all very chaotic and debauched. I was following along behind my friends quietly when things started to feel pretty dire. I needed to get away for a minute, so I told them I would catch up to them shortly, to the left of the main stage. I went to a water station and drank a little bit, but then my stomach rumbled low and menacing, and I felt kind of woozy. I think, oh my god, I'm going to have to take a shit, but I'll probably feel better after. I realize I don't have a flashlight, lighter or phone. Oh well, I have to do this thing now. I go over to the porta-johns, and there is a guy just coming out. I start to go in and he says, "Don't go in there, bro." I pick another. Toilet paper was flowing out the door. I pick another. Can't see in far as there were no glow sticks in the urinals. But I can see the TP is gone. One after another I check, no TP in any of them. I arrive at the last porta-john. It's one of the big handicapped kind you can roll a wheelchair in. It's kind of set in a weird way, on uneven ground, so it's reclined downhill, but it's stable. The entrance seems pretty nice, no filth flowing out. I go inside and feel the TP dispenser. Bingo! A nice fat roll there. Thank God. I stare into the pitch darkness and I can't make out the rim or what condition it's in. I pull a helicopter and hover, no big deal. There is a grab bar running along the side. I lower my shorts and grab onto the bar, lean back and finally drop my payload. Huge relief. I don't want to stand up fully until I get in a couple of wipes, so I reach under my arm with my left hand and start unrolling some paper. Suddenly, my fingers slip off the bar, and I plunge ass backwards into the darkness. Thwack! I land softly into the bog of eternal stench. The toilet had been filled, and it was mounted up substantially above the rim, and had flowed out onto the whole shelf. I was in a soup of shit, soaked toilet paper, and urine. It was up my ass crack, and my balls were buried in it. I stood up, pulled up my shorts, and got out of there. I made my way in the total dark back to my camp, and dug up my towel, searched through my girlfriend's shower bag, but couldn't find any soap, only shampoo and conditioner. I took my last 2 gallons of water and soaked my towel, before dumping about half a bottle of shampoo on it. Lather, rinse, repeat. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Embarrassing Stories, episode 56. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I hope everybody has a nice weekend. I'm doing absolutely nothing this weekend. I need to rest completely, so that's what I'm going to be doing. And with that, I'm going to cut this outro a bit short, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.